Red and blue lights flashed in the rearview mirror, interrupting a rare moment of civilian peace. Liam had commanded hundreds of thousands of troops, navigated war zones, and advised presidents. Yet on a quiet stretch of North Carolina highway, none of those stars on his uniform mattered, because he wasn't wearing them. He was just a black man in a nice car. What happened next would end a career, shake an entire police department, and redefine justice in one unforgettable night. The Carolina air was thick with the stifling humidity, typical of late August, clinging to the asphalt and hanging heavy in the branches of the towering loblolly pines. For General Liam Hayes, the oppressive heat was a minor inconvenience compared to the profound, almost spiritual peace of the open road. He was driving a midnight blue 1968 Chevrolet Chevelle, a masterpiece of American muscle that he had spent the last 5 years painstakingly restoring in his rare moments of downtime. The rumble of the V8 engine was a soothing baritone, a stark contrast to the cacophony of helicopter rotors, tactical briefings, and Pentagon bureaucracy that usually defined his life. Liam was a 4-star general in the United States Army, a man whose tactical brilliance had guided military operations across 3 different continents over a 38-year career. He had survived ambushes in the dusty streets of Fallujah, navigated the treacherous political minefields of Washington, D.C., and earned a chest full of medals that he rarely wore outside of absolute necessity. Tonight, he wore none of them. Dressed in a simple, unbranded grey polo shirt and tailored khaki trousers, he looked like any other successful older gentleman enjoying a Friday evening drive. He was exactly 45 minutes away from Fort Liberty, where he was scheduled to attend a private informal dinner with the base commander, Colonel David Mitchell. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, a brief respite before deploying to Europe for a NATO summit. Liam had even dismissed his standard security detail, craving the solitude that only an empty highway and a classic car could provide. It was a decision he was about to severely regret. 2 miles back, hidden behind a dilapidated billboard advertising a long bankrupt motel, sat Oakhaven Police Cruiser No. 4. Inside the vehicle, Officer Bradley Jenkins aggressively chewed a piece of peppermint gum, his eyes scanning the 2-lane highway with predatory boredom. Jenkins was 26, built like a linebacker, and carried a massive chip on his shoulder. He had barely scraped through the police academy and had already amassed a thick personnel file of civilian complaints, mostly for excessive force and racial profiling. But in the small insular town of Oakhaven, where the police chief was a family friend, Jenkins had always been shielded from any real consequences. Jenkins believed he was a wolf among sheep, a rugged enforcer of law and order who was held back by the soft rules of modern policing. He was desperate for a major bust, something to validate his inflated sense of self-importance and secure a promotion to detective. When the pristine midnight blue Chevelle cruised past him, doing exactly 55 in a 55 zone, Jenkins's eyes narrowed. He took in the impeccable paint job, the custom rims, and then peering through the slight tint of the driver's side window, he saw Liam. A black man, late 50s, driving a vehicle worth north of $80,000. In Jenkins's prejudiced mind, the calculation was instantaneous and entirely baseless. Stolen ride, or drug money. He slammed his cruiser into gear, the tires kicking up a cloud of dry red dirt as he pulled onto the highway. He didn't bother running the license plate through dispatch. He didn't need to. He had already made up his mind that the man behind the wheel was a criminal. Liam noticed the headlights approaching rapidly in his rearview mirror, long before the sirens wailed. He had spent his entire life assessing threats, and the aggressive posture of the trailing vehicle instantly put him on high alert. He checked his speedometer. Dead on 55. He checked his mirrors. Both tail lights were functioning. His tags were up to date. Then the cruiser's light bar erupted in a blinding strobe of red and blue cutting through the twilight. The harsh metallic chirp of the siren echoed through the trees. Liam let out a slow, measured breath. He had been a black man in America long before he was a general, and he knew the drill intimately. He didn't panic. He didn't swerve. He calmly engaged his right turn signal, gradually reduced his speed, and pulled the Chevelle smoothly onto the wide gravel shoulder of the highway, ensuring he was entirely out of the lane of traffic. He placed the car in park and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, save for the ticking of the cooling metal and the crunch of boots on gravel as the officer approached. Liam reached up, turned on the dome light so the interior of the car was fully illuminated, and placed both of his large, calloused hands firmly at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. He stared straight ahead, his posture immaculately straight, waiting for the encounter to begin. He hoped for a professional exchange. He was prepared for anything but. The crunch of gravel grew louder, slower, more deliberate. Liam could hear the heavy, measured footsteps of the officer, each one designed to project intimidation. From the corner of his eye, he watched as Jenkins approached the rear of the Chevelle. The officer aggressively slapped his heavy palm against the trunk, a tactic to leave a fingerprint in case the car sped off, but executed with unnecessary force. Jenkins finally stepped up to the driver's side window, holding a heavy-duty tactical flashlight. Even though the sun had barely set and the dome light was on, Jenkins aimed the blinding LED beam directly into Liam's eyes. "Roll it down," Jenkins barked, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't say please. He didn't offer a greeting. His right hand rested casually, yet menacingly, on the butt of his holstered sidearm. Liam squinted slightly against the glare, but did not turn his head away. With slow, telegraphed movements, he lowered his left hand to the manual window crank and rolled it down. "Good evening, officer," Liam said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, a voice that had commanded attention in briefing rooms across the globe. It was perfectly calm, devoid of fear or aggression. Jenkins leaned in his nose, crinkling as if he smelled something foul. "Where'd you steal the ride, old man?" Liam's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his heart rate did not spike. He had been insulted by warlords and threatened by insurgents. The petty racism of a small-town cop was nothing more than a localized irritant. However, the inherent danger of the situation was not lost on him. "This is my vehicle, officer," Liam replied, enunciating every word with crisp precision. "I can provide the registration and title. What is the reason for this stop? I ask the questions here, boy." Jenkins spat the racial slur, slipping out with practiced ease. The word hung in the humid air, toxic and heavy. "Keep your hands clamped on that wheel. You move an inch without my say-so, and we're going to have a serious problem." "Understand," Liam's hands remained perfectly still. "I understand. I am simply asking why I was pulled over. Swerving, failure to maintain lane, reckless driving. Take your pick." Jenkins lied effortlessly, shining the flashlight around the immaculate interior of the car. He found nothing out of place. No alcohol, no paraphernalia, just the pristine leather of a well-loved classic. This frustrated him further. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now, my registration and insurance are in the glove compartment," Liam explained patiently. "My identification is in my wallet, which is located in the breast pocket of my jacket, resting on the passenger seat. I will need to reach for them." Jenkins drew his weapon half an inch from the holster. The metallic click was distinct and terrifying. "I told you to keep your hands on the wheel. You reach for anything, and I will put a hole in you. You hear me?" The contradiction was blatant, a classic trap. "Give me your ID, but if you move to get it, I'll shoot." It was the lethal paradox that had claimed too many lives on American roads. Liam recognized the psychological warfare immediately. Jenkins wasn't conducting a traffic stop. He was hunting for a reason to escalate. He wanted Liam to panic, to argue, to make a sudden movement that would justify the use of force. Liam did none of those things. He possessed the discipline of a man who had stared down death on a dozen battlefields. He kept his eyes locked straight ahead, his voice a pillar of absolute ice. "Officer Tar," Liam said, the commanding authority bleeding through his civilian facade. "You have instructed me to keep my hands on the wheel, and you have instructed me to retrieve my documents. I cannot do both. I am unarmed. I am a general in the United States Army. If you would like to retrieve my jacket yourself, I invite you to do so safely." Jenkins let out a harsh, barking laugh. "A general? Yeah, and I'm the King of England. Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, I advise you to come." "I said step the hell out of the car!" Jenkins roared, his temper flaring. He unholstered his weapon, fully, pointing it down at the doorframe, his finger resting dangerously close to the trigger guard. "With your hands raised, do it now." Liam knew that asserting his rank further was useless. The man in front of him was blind to reason, fueled by bigotry and the intoxicating rush of absolute power. Slowly, methodically, Liam unbuckled his seatbelt with his left hand, while keeping his right on the wheel. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped out onto the gravel. He stood at his full height, 6'2", towering over Jenkins by 2 inches. He raised his hands to his shoulders, fingers splayed. The sheer physical presence of Liam, standing tall and utterly unafraid, seemed to enrage Jenkins even more. The officer lunged forward. Before Liam could process the movement, Jenkins grabbed Liam's left wrist, twisting it violently behind his back. The pain was sudden and sharp, tearing at an old shoulder injury Liam had sustained in a helicopter hard landing in Kandahar. "Stop resisting!" Jenkins screamed, though Liam hadn't moved a muscle in opposition. With a brutal shove, Jenkins slammed Liam face first onto the hot metal hood of the Chevelle. The impact knocked the wind out of the general. The polished steel bit into his cheek, the lingering heat from the engine radiating against his skin. Jenkins pressed his forearm heavily into the back of Liam's neck, pinning him down with entirely unnecessary force. Liam closed his eyes, drawing a slow, agonizing breath. He did not struggle. He did not curse. His mind retreated to a place of cold, tactical calculation. He noted the officer's badge number, the unit designation on the cruiser, the exact time of day. He felt the humiliating, searing pain of the metal and the crushing weight on his spine. But his spirit remained untouchable. Let him hang himself. Liam thought, his jaw clenched tightly against the hood. Let him dig the grave so deep he can never climb out. The metallic teeth of the handcuffs bit deeply into Liam's wrists as Jenkins ratcheted them shut with a cruel, unnecessary click. The metal was cold against Liam's skin, locking his arms tightly behind his back. "Thought you were untouchable in your fancy little car, didn't you?" Jenkins taunted, his breathing heavy as he yanked Liam up by the arms, sending a fresh jolt of agony through the general's injured shoulder. Liam stood tall, refusing to hunch over or show the pain. He looked down at Jenkins with a gaze so intensely piercing, so utterly devoid of submission, that the younger officer briefly broke eye contact. "You have made a catastrophic mistake, officer," Liam said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It was an objective statement of fact. "Shut your mouth!" Jenkins snapped violently, shoving Liam toward the back of the police cruiser. He opened the rear door and roughly forced the general into the cramped, hard plastic seat of the cage. The door slammed shut with a heavy final thud. Inside the cruiser it smelled of stale sweat, cheap institutional cleaner, and the lingering despair of 1,000 previous occupants. Liam sat rigidly upright, his bound hands awkwardly pressed against the small of his back. Through the plexiglass partition, he watched Jenkins strut back toward the Chevelle. Jenkins didn't have a warrant, nor did he have probable cause, but that didn't stop him from opening the passenger door and conducting an illegal search. He tore through the glove box, tossing the vehicle's registration and maintenance logs onto the floorboards. He grabbed Liam's neatly folded suit jacket from the passenger seat and began rifling through the pockets. He pulled out a slim black leather wallet. Jenkins flipped it open, his flashlight illuminating the contents. He bypassed the thick wad of $100 bills and pulled out the primary identification card. It was a United States Department of Defense Common Access card. The heavy plastic featured a microchip, a complex holographic overlay, and a crisp photograph of Liam in his dress blues, a constellation of 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders. The rank was clearly printed O10. General. Jenkins stared at it for a long moment. For a split second, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. But his arrogance quickly smothered it. He laughed aloud, a cruel mocking sound that echoed in the quiet evening air. He walked back to the cruiser, tapping the heavy plastic ID against the glass of the window. A 4-star general, seriously O10. Where'd you get this printed, old man Kinko's? You could have at least made yourself a colonel. A 4-star is just insulting my intelligence. Liam didn't respond. He simply maintained his unwavering stare. Jenkins threw the wallet into the front seat, got behind the wheel, and threw the cruiser into drive. We're going downtown, fake general. We're going to run your prints, find out what your real name is, and lock you up for forgery, resisting arrest, and whatever else I can think of on the way. As the cruiser sped away from the Chevelle, leaving the beautiful classic car abandoned on the dark shoulder of the highway, the scene shifted 30 miles away to Fort Liberty. In a spacious, heavily secured office, adorned with guidons and commendations, Colonel David Mitchell paced nervously. Mitchell was a highly decorated ranger, a man whose intense, sharp features were currently drawn tight with worry. He glanced at the large grandfather clock in the corner. It was 1945. General Hayes was supposed to arrive at 1900. In the military, being on time meant being 15 minutes early. General Liam Hayes was a man whose punctuality was legendary. He operated with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. For him to be 45 minutes late without a phone call was not just unusual, it was an anomaly that triggered immediate alarm bells in Mitchell's head. Mitchell walked over to his heavy oak desk and hit a button on his intercom. Captain Lewis. Get in here. Seconds later, his aide-de-camp, a sharp young woman in immaculate fatigues, stepped into the room. Sir, General Hayes is 45 minutes late, Mitchell said, his voice clipped. He dismissed his protective detail to drive himself. I want you to ping the GPS tracker on his vehicle. Now, don't tell his detail yet. I don't want to panic if he just got a flat tire. Just find out where that car is. Yes, sir, Captain Lewis said, immediately pulling up a classified tracking program on the secure tablet she carried. The military didn't let 4-star generals drive around completely off the grid. A silent, encrypted transponder was hidden in the undercarriage of the Chevelle. Lewis tapped the screen rapidly. Her brow furrowed. Sir, I have the signal. The vehicle is stationary on the shoulder of Highway 87. It's been parked there for 20 minutes. Mitchell's blood ran cold. A breakdown. An ambush. A medical emergency. Is he with the vehicle? Checking his personal comms unit, Lewis said, referring to the encrypted smartwatch Liam always wore. She waited for the ping to return. When it did, her eyes widened. Sir, the vehicle is on Highway 87, but the general, his beacon is moving. Fast. It's traveling away from the car, currently heading into the town limits of Oak Haven. Mitchell stared at her. Is he in an ambulance? No, sir. I'm pulling up municipal data now. The speed and route match a vehicle heading directly toward the Oakhaven Municipal Police Department. Mitchell felt a sudden, terrifying cocktail of confusion and rage boiling in his chest. The local police. Why would the local police have a 4-star general in a moving vehicle away from his car? "Get Major Higgins on the line," Mitchell ordered, his voice dropping an octave, taking on the deadly calm of a commander entering a combat zone. Higgins was the provost marshal, the head of the military police on base. "Tell him to gear up a rapid response team. 4 vehicles, full tactical. We are paying the Oakhaven Police Department a visit." Meanwhile, the Oakhaven police cruiser pulled into the back lot of the precinct. It was a drab, brutalist concrete building, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of sodium vapor lights. Jenkins threw the car into park, hauled Liam out of the back, and shoved him toward the heavy steel rear doors of the station. Liam's shoulders ached, his wrists were bleeding slightly from the tight steel, and his throat was dry, but his demeanor was as rigid as titanium. He walked with a perfect measured cadence, stepping into the glaring fluorescent lights of the booking room. The precinct was quiet. A few officers were typing at their desks, drinking stale coffee. Behind the raised booking desk sat Sergeant Davies. Davies was a 20-year veteran of the force, a man with deep bags under his eyes and a graying mustache. Before he was a cop, Davies had spent 10 years in the army, deploying twice to the Middle East. He was tired, meticulous, and completely devoid of the reckless arrogance that infected younger cops like Jenkins. "Look what the cat dragged in," Jenkins announced, loudly puffing out his chest as he shoved Liam forward. The general stumbled slightly, but caught his balance, standing tall before the booking desk. "Got a live one, Sarge. Suspicious vehicle resisting arrest and fraud. Check this out." Jenkins dramatically tossed Liam's wallet onto the high desk. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Sergeant Davies. "Says his name is Liam Hayes." Jenkins sneered, leaning against the counter. "Thinks he's a 4-star general. Tried to pass off a fake military ID. It's a pretty good counterfeit, I'll give him that, but he picked the wrong rank to fake." Davies sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. He didn't look at Liam yet. He reached down and picked up the ID card. The moment Davies's thumb brushed the plastic, his entire body froze. He knew exactly what a Department of Defense Common Access card felt like. He knew the precise weight of the plastic, the subtle texture of the embedded microchip, the exact dimensions. He tilted the card under the harsh fluorescent light. The holographic eagle and the seal of the Department of Defense shimmered perfectly, flawlessly transitioning colors. The typography was exact. It wasn't a fake. It was real. The most real piece of identification in the entire building. Davies's heart began to hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. He read the name. Hayes Liam. He read the rank. 010. General. Slowly, almost robotically, Sergeant Davies lifted his eyes from the card and looked at the man standing in handcuffs in front of his desk. He took in the impeccable posture, the squared shoulders, the calm, piercing, utterly fearless eyes that were currently staring a hole through his soul. Then Davies recognized the face. He had seen it on the Armed Forces Network. He had seen it in the base newsletter. He had seen it in portraits hanging in the Pentagon when he was a young corporal. The blood vanished from Sergeant Davies's face, leaving him a ghastly, pale white. The room seemed to spin. A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. "Jenkins," Davies whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the word. "Yes, Sarge. What do you want to charge him with first?" Jenkins asked, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality crashing down around them. Davies slowly stood up from his chair. His hands were shaking. He looked at Jenkins, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. "Jenkins," Davies croaked, his voice cracking. "What have you done?" Sergeant Davies did not look at Jenkins. His eyes remained locked on the Department of Defense identification card, resting on the scarred wood of the booking desk. The room had suddenly grown entirely devoid of oxygen. The hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like a deafening roar in his ears. "Sarge!" Jenkins asked, his arrogant smirk faltering just a fraction as he noticed the older man's sudden pallor. "What's the matter with you? It's a fake. Run him through the system." Davies moved with a sudden, jerky urgency that startled every other officer in the bullpen. He snatched the heavy ring of precinct keys from his belt, bolted out from behind the raised desk, and practically shoved Jenkins aside. "Hey, watch it!" Jenkins barked, stumbling backward. Davies ignored him. He stopped dead 2 feet in front of Liam, his chest heaving. As a former army corporal, the muscle memory of his military training violently hijacked his nervous system. His spine snapped straight, his heels clicked together, and he brought his right hand up in a crisp textbook salute. "General Hayes, sir." Davies stammered, his voice laced with absolute horror. "Sergeant William Davies, formerly of the 101st Airborne. Sir, I am so profoundly sorry." The bullpen went dead silent. Phones stopped ringing, fingers hovered frozen over keyboards. 5 pairs of eyes stared in bewildered shock at the veteran sergeant, saluting the handcuffed black man in the center of the room. Liam did not smile. He did not boast. He simply nodded his head a fraction of an inch. "At ease, Sergeant. And please remove these restraints. They are aggravating an old aviation injury." "Immediately, sir," Davies said, his hands trembling violently as he stepped behind the general. He fumbled with the small silver key, struggling to fit it into the keyhole of the handcuffs. Jenkins, finally realizing the ground was shifting beneath his feet, stepped forward, his face flushing dark red with a toxic mix of confusion and defensive rage. "Davies, what the hell are you doing? You don't uncuff a suspect without my authorization. That's my collar. He's a fraud." Davies spun around, the unlocked handcuffs dangling from his fist. The veteran cop's eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a fury that mirrored his terror. "Shut your mouth, Jenkins. You ignorant, arrogant fool. Look at the card, the microchip, the holographics, the DOD seal. It's real. Do you understand who this is? You just assaulted and falsely imprisoned the commanding officer of the United States Army Forces. Command." Jenkins blinked the words bouncing off his thick skull. No way. He's driving a stolen muscle car. He got aggressive. Liam calmly brought his arms to the front, rubbing his raw, bleeding wrists. He adjusted his grey polo shirt and squared his shoulders. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the stagnant air of the precinct like a precision-guided munition. "Officer Jenkins." Liam began, his tone quiet, but carrying the localized gravity of a black hole. "At exactly 1842, you initiated a traffic stop without probable cause. You explicitly threatened lethal force when I offered compliance. You physically assaulted me, conducted an illegal search of my vehicle, and transported me across county lines without stating a valid charge. You have operated under the assumption that your badge shields you from accountability." Liam took one slow step forward, towering over the younger cop. "You are sorely mistaken." Before Jenkins could formulate another belligerent response, the heavy wooden door to the precinct captain's office swung open. Chief Robert Miller, a heavily built man whose political connections had kept him in power for 2 decades, stepped out holding a half-empty mug of coffee. "What in God's name is all this yelling about?" Chief Miller grumbled, adjusting his belt. "We have civilians in the waiting area." "Chief," Davies said, his voice cracking, "we have a catastrophic situation. Officer Jenkins just brought in—" The sentence was never finished. It started as a low rumble, a vibration that shook the cheap drop-ceiling tiles of the Oakhaven Police Department. The coffee in Chief Miller's mug began to ripple, Outside the frosted glass windows of the precinct's front doors, the darkness of the evening was suddenly obliterated by a blinding barrage of strobe lights. Not police red and blue, but the stark, piercing white and amber of tactical military vehicles. 4 matte black, up-armored SUVs skidded to a synchronized halt, completely blocking the street, the sidewalks, and the precinct exits. The heavy, unmistakable sound of armored doors slamming open echoed through the concrete walls. "What the hell is going on out there?" Chief Miller demanded, dropping his coffee mug. It shattered on the linoleum floor, but no one looked down. Jenkins instinctively reached for his sidearm. Liam's voice cracked like a whip. "Do not touch your weapon, officer, unless you wish to make the last and worst mistake of your very short life." The front double doors of the Oakhaven Police Department didn't just open, they were violently breached. The heavy glass panes rattled in their aluminum frames as 2 massive men in full tactical gear shoved them wide. They wore olive-drab fatigues, heavy plate carriers, and Kevlar helmets. Emblazoned across their chests in stark white lettering was the acronym Military Police. They fanned out instantly, their hands resting securely on the grips of their lowered M4 carbines. They didn't aim at the local police, but their tactical positioning was flawless. They had effectively secured the room in less than 3 seconds. Behind them strode Colonel David Mitchell and Major Higgins. Mitchell looked like a man ready to burn the building to its foundations. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle ticked furiously in his cheek. He wore his combat uniform, the silver eagle of his rank gleaming on his chest. His eyes swept the room with predatory speed, bypassing the bewildered local cops, ignoring the terrified Sergeant Davies, and locking instantly onto Liam. Mitchell saw the raw red indentations on the general's wrists. He saw the smear of dirt and grease on Liam's cheek, from where his face had been slammed into the hood of the Chevelle. Mitchell's face turned completely devoid of emotion, the hallmark of a highly trained ranger about to unleash absolute hell. "General Hayes, sir," Colonel Mitchell said, snapping a razor-sharp salute, followed immediately by Major Higgins and the tactical MPs. "Stand down, David," Liam replied calmly, returning the salute with a wince as his injured shoulder flared. Chief Miller, finally finding his voice, stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "Now hold on just a damn minute. You are in municipal jurisdiction. You cannot storm into a civilian police department with armed soldiers. I am Chief Miller, and I demand to know." "Shut up," Major Higgins barked. The provost marshal stepped forward, his sheer physical mass dwarfing the police chief. "By order of the United States Department of Defense, we are securing a high-value asset and investigating the kidnapping and assault of a flag officer. Jurisdiction just got elevated way above your pay grade, Chief." "Kidnapping." Chief Miller sputtered, his eyes darting frantically between the MPs and his own officers. He looked at Jenkins. "Jenkins, what did you do?" Jenkins was visibly shaking now. The unassailable bubble of his localized power had been violently pierced by the terrifying reality of federal military authority. He was driving a suspected stolen vehicle. He resisted. He had a fake ID." Colonel Mitchell walked slowly across the room, closing the distance until he was standing inches away from Jenkins. The local officer instinctively leaned back, intimidated by the terrifying aura of the combat veteran. "You detained a 4-star general." Mitchell said, his voice a lethal vibrating whisper. "You put handcuffs on a man who answers directly to the Secretary of Defense, and from the bruising on his wrists and the contusions on his face, you used physical force. He was reaching for something." Jenkins lied, a desperate, pathetic attempt to utilize the standard excuse that had saved him from internal affairs complaints in the past. He reached into his jacket. "I feared for my life." Liam let out a soft, dry chuckle. It was a terrifying sound in the tense room. "Major Higgins," Liam said, turning to the provost marshal. "Did you secure my vehicle?" "Yes, sir," Higgins replied. "A secondary team is with your Chevelle right now. They found your wallet tossed on the floorboard, and the car had been illegally searched." "Excellent," Liam said. He turned his attention back to Chief Miller, who looked like he was on the verge of a myocardial infarction. "Chief Miller, I drive a 1968 Chevrolet Chevelle. It is a vintage vehicle. However, because of my security clearance and my rank, the Pentagon retrofitted my personal vehicle with a state-of-the-art 360-degree encrypted audio-visual recording system. It continuously uploads to a secure server at Fort Liberty." Jenkins's jaw dropped. All the blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. Liam continued, his voice echoing with devastating finality. "Furthermore, my smartwatch issued by Defense Information Systems Agency actively records audio telemetry when my heart rate spikes above a certain threshold. Every word your officer said, every racial slur he used, every threat of lethal force he manufactured is currently sitting on a server in Colonel Mitchell's office." Chief Miller closed his eyes, swaying slightly on his feet. He knew exactly what this meant. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was the end of his department. It was a federal civil rights investigation, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the national media all descending on his town like a biblical plague. "General Washt," Chief Miller pleaded, his arrogance completely evaporating. "Sir, please, this is a catastrophic misunderstanding. Officer Jenkins he's a rogue element. We will fire him immediately. We will drop all charges. We can handle this internally." "Internally?" Colonel Mitchell stepped in, his voice rising in volume. "Your officer assaulted a federal official. That is a felony under 18 U.S. Code, Section 111. He deprived him of his civil rights, under color of law, a violation of Section 242. You aren't handling anything internally, Chief. The FBI's regional field office has already been notified. They are en route. The bullpen of the Oakhaven Police Department felt like a tomb. The air was heavy with the suffocating weight of irrevocable consequences. Jenkins, the man who had styled himself as a wolf among sheep, was now trembling so violently his duty belt rattled. The illusion of his supreme authority had been shattered, replaced by the crushing reality of federal prison. "Sarge," Jenkins whispered, turning a desperate, pleading gaze toward Sergeant Davies. "Sarge, you gotta help me explain." Davies stepped back, disgust contorting his weary features. "You dug this grave yourself, Bradley. I told you 100 times your badge wasn't a license to terrorize people. Now you're going to pay for it." Liam stepped forward, the physical pain of his injuries fading into the background as the commanding aura of his rank took full precedence. He looked at Jenkins not with rage, but with a profound clinical pity. "Power." Liam began, his baritone voice commanding absolute silence from every person in the room. "Is a heavy burden. It requires discipline, restraint, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. You, Officer Jenkins, wear a badge that represents the trust of your community. You used it as a weapon against someone you deemed lesser. You thought I had no voice because you judged me entirely by the color of my skin and your own preconceived biases." Liam gestured toward Colonel Mitchell and the heavily armed military police standing like statues around the perimeter. "I am fortunate," Liam continued. "I have the backing of the United States military. I have resources. I have cameras. But what about the young men who don't? What about the citizens you've pulled over on dark highways who didn't have stars on their shoulders or encrypted servers backing them up? How many lives have you ruined because there was no one to stop you?" Jenkins couldn't meet the general's eyes. He stared at the scuffed linoleum floor, a single tear of pure panic cutting a path through the sweat on his cheek. Chief Miller frantically wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "General Hayes, I swear to you I didn't know he was operating like this. I will strip him of his badge right this second. Hand over your weapon and your shield, Jenkins. Now, do not touch him," Chief Major Higgins ordered, stepping between Miller and Jenkins. "He is now a subject of a federal investigation. We will hold him securely until the FBI agents arrive to take him into federal custody. He doesn't belong to your department anymore." Higgins nodded to two of his military police officers. They moved forward with terrifying efficiency. Before Jenkins could even process the command, his duty weapon was stripped from his holster, and a pair of heavy military-grade zip ties was ratcheted securely around his wrists. The sound of the thick plastic zipping shut was the exact inverse of the metallic click Jenkins had used on Liam less than an hour ago. It was the sound of justice recalibrating. "Colonel Mitchell," Liam said, turning away from the pathetic sight of the arrested officer. "Sir," Mitchell responded, standing at attention. "I believe we had a dinner reservation," Liam said, his tone finally softening, returning to the calm, distinguished gentleman who had been enjoying a drive earlier that evening. "I am profoundly late. The chef kept it warm for you, General," Mitchell said, a fierce, satisfied pride evident in his eyes. "Let us go, then. Sergeant Davies," Liam said, pausing at the shattered glass of the front doors. Davies snapped to attention once more. "Sir, you are a credit to your former uniform. When this department is inevitably restructured by the Department of Justice, I hope you remain to guide the next generation of officers. They will desperately need someone who understands the true meaning of duty." "Thank you, sir," Davies said, his voice thick with emotion. Liam walked out of the Oakhaven Police Department, the heavy tactical doors held open for him by two armed sentries. He stepped out into the humid Carolina night air, the blinding white strobe lights of the military convoy casting long, heroic shadows against the concrete walls. He climbed into the back of Colonel Mitchell's armored SUV, leaving the broken remnants of a corrupt precinct behind him. The drive to Fort Liberty was quiet, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the precinct. Liam looked out the tinted window, watching the pine trees blur past. He had fought battles across the globe, commanding armies to secure freedom in distant lands. But tonight was a sobering reminder that some of the most critical battles for justice, dignity, and the soul of the nation were still being fought right here, at home, on the dark, lonely stretches of American highways. The departure of General Liam Hayes and the military police convoy did not bring silence back to the Oakhaven Police Department. Instead, it left behind a suffocating, terrifying vacuum that was quickly filled by the looming dread of federal intervention. Chief Robert Miller retreated to his office, locking the door and frantically dialing his personal lawyer, his political fixers, and anyone he thought could save him. None of them answered. News of a military intervention at a local precinct had already leaked to the regional dispatchers, and the rats were fleeing the sinking ship. At exactly 21:15, the second wave arrived. There were no flashing lights this time, no blaring sirens, just the ominous synchronized hum of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans pulling into the precinct lot. The doors opened, and a dozen men and women wearing navy blue windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across the back stepped out into the humid night. Leading them was Special Agent John Reynolds, a tall, gaunt man with silver hair and eyes like chipped flint. Reynolds was a veteran of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. He had built his career dismantling corrupt police departments, prosecuting hate crimes, and putting dirty cops in federal penitentiaries. He did not suffer fools, and he had zero patience for small-town tyrants. Reynolds walked straight through the shattered front doors of the precinct, his tactical team fanning out behind him with boxes, hard drives, and federal warrants. Sergeant William Davies stood at attention, waiting. "Agent Reynolds," Davies said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The suspect Bradley Jenkins is secured in interrogation room A. The military police left him in zip ties per your request." "Thank you, Sergeant," Reynolds said smoothly. "I need you to gather every officer in the building and have them surrender their duty weapons and badges to my team. This precinct is now an active federal crime scene." Chief Miller burst out of his office, his face a mottled, unhealthy purple. "Now see here, you cannot just walk in here and declare my department a crime scene. I am the chief of police. I have rights, and my men have—" "Robert Miller." Agent Reynolds interrupted his voice, dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. He didn't use the title chief. He pulled a thick folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and thrust it against Miller's chest. "This is a federal search and seizure warrant signed by a United States District Judge. It covers every computer, every filing cabinet, every dashcam and every bodycam in this building. It also covers your personal phone and your private email accounts." Miller looked at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Officer Jenkins did not act in a vacuum," Reynolds stated, stepping closer, forcing Miller to backpedal. "When the Pentagon uploaded General Hayes's vehicle footage to our servers an hour ago, my cyber division didn't just watch the assault. They ran Jenkins's badge number through the national database. We found 34 buried excessive force complaints, 12 dismissed civil rights lawsuits, and a digital paper trail of you, Robert Miller, personally making sure none of them ever saw a judge." Miller's knees buckled slightly. He grasped the doorframe of his office to keep from collapsing. "We are not just here for the assault on a 4-star general." Reynolds continued signaling his agents to begin bagging the precinct's computer towers. "We are here for the systemic deprivation of rights under the color of law. You protected a predator because he was your friend's son, and because you thought the people he targeted were invisible. You picked the wrong night, and you picked the wrong man." Down the hall inside the stark grey walls of interrogation room, a Bradley Jenkins sat shivering. The air conditioning was cranked high, but he was sweating profusely. The heavy military zip ties dug into his wrists. The bravado, the racial slurs, the aggressive posturing, it had all evaporated, replaced by the sickening realization of his own utter insignificance. The door opened, and Agent Reynolds walked in, carrying a laptop. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer water. He simply sat down across the metal table, opened the laptop, and turned the screen to face Jenkins. "I want you to watch this, Bradley," Reynolds said. He hit play. The screen showed the crystal-clear 4K resolution footage from the hidden cameras on Liam's Chevelle. It captured the pristine, driving the sudden aggressive pullover. The audio was flawless. Jenkins's voice filled the small room, dripping with condescension and racist vitriol. "Where'd you steal the ride, old man? I ask the questions here, boy." Then came the physical assault, the violent twisting of the general's arm, the sickening thud as Liam's face was smashed against the hot steel hood. Jenkins couldn't watch. He closed his eyes and turned his head away, a pathetic whimper escaping his throat. "Look at it," Reynolds commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. Jenkins flinched and opened his eyes. "That man has 2 Purple Hearts. He commands armies. And you treated him like garbage because of his skin color. You are being charged with federal kidnapping, aggravated assault, and civil rights violations. You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Your chief is going down, your department is being disbanded, and your life as a free man ended the second you put your hands on that car." Reynolds closed the laptop with a sharp snap that made Jenkins jump. "The DOJ does not offer plea deals for cases with 4K video evidence. Get comfortable, Bradley. You're going to be in a cage for a very long time." 6 months later, the winter air in Raleigh, North Carolina, was crisp and biting. Inside the polished mahogany walls of the United States Federal Courthouse, the atmosphere was even colder. The gallery was packed to absolute capacity. National news anchors, civil rights leaders, and military personnel filled the benches. The story of the highway general had become a national sensation, sparking massive protests and a congressional inquiry into small-town police corruption. At the defense table sat Bradley Jenkins. He was no longer a rugged enforcer. He was pale, gaunt, and wore a shapeless, bright orange federal jumpsuit. His hair was closely cropped, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. Beside him sat a public defender, as his police union had immediately abandoned him when the federal indictments dropped. Across the room, sitting entirely alone at the prosecutor's table, by special permission of the court, was General Liam Hayes. He was not wearing a grey polo shirt today. Today, Liam wore his Army service uniform. The deep blue fabric was perfectly tailored. The 4 silver stars on each of his epaulets caught the light of the brass chandeliers. The left breast of his jacket was a vibrant tapestry of ribbons, commendations, and medals, a visual testament to a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and unbreakable discipline. He looked like an ancient king sitting in judgment. Judge Thomas Harding, a stern federal jurist with decades on the bench, looked down over his reading glasses. "Officer Jenkins." Judge Harding began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "A jury of your peers took less than 2 hours to find you guilty on all counts. Before I pass sentencing, the victim has requested to read a statement. General Hayes, the floor is yours." Liam stood up. He did not rush. He buttoned his jacket with his left hand, his right shoulder still bearing the subtle stiffness of the assault. He walked to the wooden podium in the center of the courtroom. The room was so silent, you could hear the soft rustle of the reporters' notepads. Liam adjusted the microphone, looking directly at Jenkins. Jenkins couldn't meet his gaze, staring fixedly at his shackled hands. "I have spent nearly 4 decades defending the Constitution of the United States." Liam's deep, resonant voice filled the room, carrying the weight of command and the sorrow of profound experience. "I have sent men and women into combat. I have written letters to grieving mothers. I have done this because I believe in the fundamental promise of this nation that all people are created equal, and all are entitled to the equal protection of the law." Liam gripped the edges of the podium. "When I was pulled over on Highway 87, I was not a general. I was not a soldier. To Mr. Jenkins, I was a stereotype. I was a target. The uniform I wear today protected me in the aftermath, but it did not protect me on the side of that road. And that is the tragedy that brings us here today." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy over the courtroom. "I do not stand here fueled by vengeance." Liam continued, his voice softening just a fraction, projecting a devastating kind of pity. "Mr. Jenkins is a symptom of a deeper sickness, a sickness where authority is wielded without accountability, where a badge is used as a shield for bigotry rather than a beacon of safety. I survived that night because of who I am. But I speak today for the thousands of men and women who look like me, who did not have stars on their shoulders, who did not have encrypted cameras, and who did not survive their encounters with men like Bradley Jenkins." Liam looked up at Judge Harding. "Your Honor, true justice is not just the punishment of the guilty. It is the dismantling of the systems that allowed the guilty to thrive. I ask the court to sentence this man to the maximum penalty under the law, not just as a consequence of his actions, but as a warning to every corrupt officer in this country who believes they operate in the dark." Liam stepped back, offered a crisp, flawless salute to the judge, and returned to his seat. Judge Harding let out a long breath, clearly moved by the commanding presence of the general. He turned his attention back to the defense table. Bradley Jenkins. Judge Harding said, his voice hardening into steel. You took an oath to protect and serve. You perverted that oath to terrorize and dominate. You have brought disgrace upon yourself, your department, and the noble profession of law enforcement. For the charge of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, I sentence you to 120 months in federal prison. For the charge of aggravated assault, I sentence you to an additional 60 months, to be served consecutively. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the United States Marshals. The gavel slammed down with the finality of a gunshot. Jenkins broke down sobbing uncontrollably as the heavy steel chains were wrapped around his waist by the marshals. He was hauled out the side door, his cries echoing down the long, empty marble hallway until they faded into nothing. The aftermath of Oak Haven was absolute. Chief Robert Miller was indicted 3 weeks later on federal racketeering and corruption charges, ultimately pleading guilty to avoid a trial. The Oak Haven Police Department was temporarily disbanded and placed under federal receivership. When the department was finally reconstituted a year later, it looked entirely different. The new interim chief of police was William Davies. He had stripped the toxic culture down to the studs, implementing rigorous bias training, community outreach programs, and zero-tolerance policies for excessive force. He hung a framed copy of the United States Constitution in the booking room, right where Liam Hayes had once stood in handcuffs. As for Liam, his life returned to the grueling high-stakes world of the Pentagon. He deployed to Europe, oversaw global strategies, and continued to wear the weight of his stars with unmatched dignity. But a few months after the trial, on a warm spring evening, Liam found himself back in North Carolina. He was off duty. He wore a simple white linen shirt and dark jeans. He walked out to the driveway of his private residence, running his hand along the pristine, midnight blue paint of his 1968 Chevrolet Chevelle. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather familiar and comforting. He turned the key, and the massive V8 engine roared to life, a deep mechanical heartbeat. Liam put the car in gear and pulled out onto the open highway. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows through the loblolly pines. He rolled the windows down, letting the warm Carolina breeze rush through the cabin. He drove exactly the speed limit, not out of fear, but out of a profound, hard-won peace. The road was his again, and this time he knew that the shadows lurking behind the billboards were just a little bit brighter. What a powerhouse of a story. General Liam Hayes' terrifying ordeal and ultimate triumph proves that true authority doesn't come from a badge, but from unwavering integrity and the courage to hold the corrupt accountable. The takedown of Jenkins and Chief Miller is a masterclass in justice served cold. If this intense real-life drama got your blood pumping and made you cheer for the ultimate clapback against corruption, hit that like button right now. Share this incredible story with your friends to spread the message of justice, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic, jaw-dropping stories.